Chapter 1. The letter without a signature. The mist had not yet lifted from the rooftops of London when Hercule Poirot sat down to his breakfast. A perfectly symmetrical arrangement, 2 slices of toast, 1 soft-boiled egg in its porcelain cup, a silver spoon laid at a right angle to the plate. The morning sun tried its best to filter through the gauzy curtains of his flat on Whitehaven Mansions, but Poirot preferred precision over mood lighting. He was just about to spread a delicate layer of marmalade when he noticed the envelope dotted. Had not been there the night before. Hastings was away visiting friends in Bath, and Miss Lemon had taken the week off to attend to her cousin's wedding in Surrey. The Morning Post was Poirot's own to collect, and he had done so religiously. At 8 o'clock sharp. Yet now, at 8:30, a pale envelope, ivory, heavy paper, no stamp rested on the edge of his table, tucked into the corner as if it had drifted there on its own. He frowned. Mon Dieu. He murmured, "The timing is not ordinary." The handwriting was precise, slanted, in black ink. No return address, no name. Only a single word on the front, Poirot dot inside. A single sheet. No date. No greeting. Just 6 lines. Handwritten. He did not die of natural causes. They will insist he did. The truth hangs behind the tilted picture. Cariswood Hall, Sussex. The widow will lie. The butler knows something he cannot say. There was no signature. Poirot read the letter twice, then a third time, then held it up to the light. No watermark, no hidden writing. But the ink still faintly damp in places. Recent. He rose immediately. The egg remained untouched. The toast growing cold. 10 minutes later. He had telephoned the Sussex Constabulary and requested to speak to a man named Inspector Bertram Keene. The voice on the line was gruff but not unfriendly. So Everard Charteris. Keene confirmed. Yes, died 3 days ago. Peaceful, sudden, but not suspicious. Heart failure. Forgive me, Poirot said smoothly. But I find that most deaths are described as peaceful by those who benefit from silence. Keene had grumbled something about busy schedules and unnecessary fuss, but agreed to meet Poirot if he came down to Sussex himself, and so, by noon, Hercule Poirot was en route to the quiet village of Aberdeen, where Cariswood Hall stood above, the cliffs like an old man brooding over the sea. On the train, he reviewed what little he knew. Sir Everard Charteris, a former financier, now retired, known for aggressive business deals and an extensive collection of antique weapons and oil paintings, a family man by outward appearances, married to Lady Eugenia. 1 daughter, Clara, no sons. Younger brother, Henry Charteris, presumed dead in the 1890s under uncertain circumstances. Cariswood Hall had been in the Charteris family since the 18th century. The letter suggested something, concealed something deliberate. The tilted picture. Poirot made a mental note. As he stared out the window at the passing fields. He considered the psychology of anonymous letters. Most bore the scent of emotion, fear, desperation, or vindication. But this one, it was clinical, cold, observational, a chess player's warning. By 3 o'clock. Poirot was standing at the gates of Cariswood Hall. The manor was tall and proud, with ivy clinging to its stone-like memory. The windows watched silently, and the gravel crunched underfoot as if whispering secrets. He was received by the butler Cummings, who had the rigid back and waxy mustache of a man trained in pre-war serve. "Ice, your name, sir, Hercule Poirot," he said with his usual crispness. "I have an appointment with Inspector Keene. He awaits me. I believe." The butler did not blink. "Very good, sir. This way." The drawing-room was colder than expected. The fireplace unlit. though it was a damp afternoon. The furniture was opulent, but stiff dark woods, deep greens, oil portraits in heavy frames, and there it was, the painting. Above the very chair where Sir Everard had been found dead, a large portrait of two young men, both in military dress, one unmistakably Everard, the other likely his lost brother Henry. The frame leaned askew subtly, but gently, not by accident. Portrait moved toward it, glancing at the surrounding room. To side tables, one with a crystal decanter, the other with a brass lamp, a folded newspaper on the armrest. The carpet was lush, a shade of blood red, worn down near the hearth. He resisted the urge to straighten the painting. Instead, he observed the alignment of furniture around it, nothing else disturbed. Only the frame, accidental, none. He whispered, "This is what they call," and nudge. A sharp voice called from behind, "You are the gentleman from London." Then Inspector Keene entered, bowler hat under one arm, coat slightly askew. He looked as if he'd come from the rugby field rather than a crime scene. "I am. Yes, Hercule. Poirot." Keene glanced round, unimpressed. "If you're hoping for a scandal, I'm afraid you're wasting your time. No signs of poison, violence, or theft." Dr. Hargreaves signed off on heart failure. Clean and tidy, Poirot smiled. Mildly, but mon ami, sometimes what is to tidy is precisely what disturbs me. Keene snorted. "You think it's murder?" "I think," Poirot said, stepping back to observe the picture from a new angle, "that the truth, monsieur, may be hanging quite literally in front of our eyes." Keene crossed his arms. "You know, the widow doesn't want trouble. She has it already." Poirot replied, "Only, perhaps, she does not yet realize the kind of trouble it is." From somewhere deeper in the manor, a piano note rang out. Then another hesitant, delicate, someone playing scales softly, as if to test if the house still had music in it. Poirot turned his head. "The daughter?" he asked. Keene nodded. "Clara. Charteris. Talented. Withdrawn. Returned from Vienna only last week. Engaged to some literary chap, Adrian Cole." Poirot said, as if that told him something. "Tell me, monsieur, was the body moved before the doctor arrived?" Keene frowned. "No. Why?" Poirot pointed a slender finger at the floor beneath the armchair. "Then perhaps you will explain to me why there are faint indentations, as if the chair was pulled forward only slightly and then pushed back." Keene crouched beside the chair and squinted, his brow furrowed. "I'll be." Poirot did not smile. He only adjusted his cuffs and said softly, "We begin. Chapter 2. The widow and the pianist Lady Eugenia Charteris sat as if carved from alabaster. Her posture was impeccable. Her dress black crepe trimmed in subtle lace, and her fingers gloved. Though the drawing-room was warm now, a fire having been lit at Poirot's suggestion, she had not wept, not in front of Poirot or the inspector, and her voice had the composed resonance of a woman who had long since trained her emotions to heal. "I do hope you're not here to indulge Inspector Keene's suspicions, monsieur." "Poirot," she said, eyes fixed on the teapot. "We've had enough disruption as it is. My husband died in his favorite chair, in his own home, after a day spent walking the grounds. There is nothing scandalous in that." Poirot took the tea without comment, observing how her hand trembled slightly as she handed it to him. He offered a mild smile, but said nothing of the tremor. Instead, he glanced toward the piano in the corner, where soft notes still rang out in the distance. "She plays beautifully," he said. Lady Eugenia's face softened, just perceptibly. Clara was gifted from a very young age. Music was her refuge. Her father was not a gentleman. I'm afraid None. Poirot tilted his head. But surely, to those he loved, he must have been kind. Lady Eugenia's expression shifted, less sorrow, more calculation. Everard was a man of principles, of order. Love, for him, was not sentimental. It was expressed in duty, in expectations, and yet. Poirot said, stirring his tea precisely, "Once, you remained married for over 30 years. She gave a brittle laugh. Divorce, Monsieur Poirot, is a luxury for the bold or the poor. I was neither. We had a daughter to raise, a household to run. What one endures in silence becomes habit." Poirot leaned back slightly. "And what of the habit of fear? Madam, did Sir Everard inspire that as well?" She flinched, an involuntary flicker in the corner of her eye. "I don't care for your tone." "Forgive me," he said gently. "I merely wish to understand the man in whose chair death came so silently." She set her teacup down, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "If you must know, Sir Everard could be cruel when he felt slighted, especially by those he considered weak or sentimental. He disinherited his own brother for a marrying beneath him, then destroyed the man's reputation when he dared to return. Henry died in a clinic, penniless and forgotten." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Then the portrait in the drawing-room, that was the brother." "Yes, Henry Charteris. The family never forgave Everard for what he did to him, though no one ever spoke of it. I had the painting moved back into the room only recently. Everard hated it, said the man's eyes followed him." Poirot sipped slowly. "And yet it was hanging above him when he died." Lady Eugenia gave no answer. Instead, she stood and moved toward the fireplace, as though warming herself. Poirot watched her carefully, the precision of her movements, the practiced poise, the avoidance of eye contact. Her grief, if it existed, was locked away tightly. "I didn't tilt the frame," she said abruptly. "Pardon, you were wondering. If I did, I saw your eyes on it. It's been like that since the morning after his death. The servants said it must have loosened during the night. I didn't touch it. I couldn't bear to." Poirot nodded, not confirming nor denying the thought. "And the nurse, Miss Venn, was she present at the time?" Lady Eugenia gave a faint grimace. "Miss Venn is competent, but not clever. She'd gone to fetch tea. She returned, to find him already gone. So she says." Poirot stood. "Would you permit me to speak with your daughter?" Lady Eugenia hesitated. "She's fragile, Monsieur Poirot. This has affected her more than she lets on. I shall be delicate." "Madam," she relented with a sigh. "She's in the music room, down the hall, past the library. I'll send word." The music was clearer as Poirot approached Debussy, if he was not mistaken. The kind of melancholy piece that flowed like rain on glass. He paused at the doorway, waiting to be acknowledged. Clara Charteris did not look up. She was thin, almost waif-like, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun. Her hands moved with grace over the keys. But there was no joy in the playing-only habit. And so, finally, she finished and turned. "I suppose you're the detective." "Oui, Mademoiselle." Hercule Poirot, "At your service." Clara stood, but did not offer her hand. Her eyes were large, violet grey, and ringed with weariness. "I don't see what good this will do. Father is dead. That's final." Poirot approached slowly. "Sometimes, Mademoiselle, the finality of death masks the unfinished truths of life." She gave a humorless smile. "You're very poetic for a detective. I find poetry useful when facing silence." He nodded toward the piano. "You played beautifully. It doesn't matter anymore." "I believe it does. You were in Vienna?" "No." She nodded. "Studying at the conservatory. I returned after. A letter. Yes, from father. Not a kind letter. not a warm one. He said if I didn't return at once, I would be cut off, financially. Completely. He had decided I was wasting my life, and he wouldn't indulge me further. So I came back. Porret leaned forward slightly. Did he say why the change of heart? She shook her head. He never explained himself. He never had to. You obeyed, or you were erased. And how did your fiancé take this demand? Adrian, her voice was brittle. He said we should be practical. Make peace, that we couldn't afford to lose father's money. Porret nodded thoughtfully. Was your father planning any changes to his will? I don't know, she said, but Porret saw the hesitation, the flicker in her expression. You suspect something. She looked away. He'd been speaking privately with Dr. Hargreaves and with Mother. I overheard them arguing the night before he died. I don't know what it was about, but Mother sounded frightened. Porret stepped back. You are most helpful, Mademoiselle. One last question. Did your father ever speak of the portrait? She looked up sharply. He hated it. He used to make Cummings take it down whenever he entered the room. Said it was watching him, that Henry knew something. Porret nodded once. Merci. As he exited the room, the final notes of the piano resumed. Delicate and uncertain, Porret paused again. And this time he frowned, for it was not the melody that troubled him but the rhythm. It was off by a single beat, as if someone had taught themselves to appear skilled, while hiding that they were improvising entirely. Chapter 3. The butler who remembered too much sun had finally emerged from the coastal mist, casting long, golden slats of light through the tall windows of Cariswood Hall. Porret, with his hands neatly behind his back, took a slow turn through the morning room, a place designed for leisure, for reading, for conversation. Yet in this house it felt more like a museum, where emotions were placed under glass and only the echo of past dramas remained. He had asked to speak next with Cummings, the butler. And when the door opened precisely 4 minutes later, Cummings entered with the poise of a man who had served dukes, generals, and prime ministers, and who did not appreciate disruption. You wished to see me, monsieur. Cummings. Yes, please, let us sit just here. I prefer chairs that are symmetrical in position. You see, Porret gestured with a gracious hand. The butler remained standing, as you wish. Porret said pleasantly, You were in the house the night Sir Everard died. I was, monsieur. I am always on duty until 11. I retire precisely after preparing the library for the master's evening cigar. And on that evening, anything out of the ordinary. Nothing at all. His tone was practiced, neutral, exact. Sir Everard requested the usual. A copy of the Times, a glass of mineral water Perrier. Chilled a blanket for the draught, and the fire stoked. He went to the drawing-room, and I heard no further call. Porret tilted his head. But you did not check on him. It was not my place to do so. Monsieur, Miss then was present. I presume she would remain close, yet she claims to have left the room. Cummings's eyes flickered, just briefly. She may have stepped out. I do not monitor the movements of every member of staff. None. Of course not. And when did you discover Sir Everard's body? I was summoned by Lady Eugenia at precisely 9:27. She was the first to find him, I believe. Porret sat forward. You've been in this house many years, Cummings. 32, monsieur. Then you knew Henry Childress as well. Cummings's face shifted, but only slightly, briefly. He did not remain at Cariswood for long. He was not suited to the life here. Porret's tone sharpened. Did you like him? There was a pause barely perceptible. He was kind, less guarded than Sir Everard. He laughed more. Porret nodded slowly, and he left under Complicated circumstances. No. Another pause. Sir Henry married a woman of modest background. Sir Everard took exception. There was a quarrel. Sir Henry left the house one night and never returned. A few years later, word reached us that he had died abroad. Abroad where? I believe it was in Belgium. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Indeed. That is not a detail mentioned in the papers. I may have overheard Lady Eugenia say it. Years ago, Poirot leaned back. I wonder, Cummings, if the painting of Sir Henry ever unsettled you. This time, the silence stretched. Finally, Cummings spoke, more softly. He was fond of that room, you know, always reading. Always sitting by the fire with a book. When they brought the portrait back up, I noticed it too. The tilt. Poirot watched him. Did you report it? I assumed it was accidental. But the screws on that frame, they're deep set. It would take some force to shift them even slightly. And the wire behind it is strong. Old, but strong. Poirot nodded. I examined it myself. It's been deliberately moved, not recently. Gradually, perhaps tilted over time, a gesture of discomfort, perhaps, or of warning. Cummings didn't respond. Instead, he looked toward the window, where the cliffs beyond Carriswood could just be glimpsed. He used to walk to the edge of the sea path, he said, almost dreamily. Sir Everard, I mean every Thursday morning, said the view reminded him of something. Did he ever mention what? Not to me. Poirot stood. One final question. Mon ami. Was there anyone, any visitor, guest, or stranger in the house in the days before Sir Everard's death? Cummings hesitated. Only Mr. Fall. Oh yes, the literary man. He arrived 2 days before. Said he was writing a biography of Henry Chartres. He had a letter of introduction from one of Sir Everard's former colleagues. Did Sir Everard seem pleased by this? Cummings gave a wry glance. He was polite, but I could tell he hated the intrusion. He called it digging up the bones of men who died for good reason. Poirot let the silence settle. Then, where can I find Mr. Fall now? He's staying at the Village Inn, though I suspect he'll return soon. He left behind a briefcase. Poirot tapped his fingers together thoughtfully. Curious that a biographer of the forgotten brother should arrive just before the elder brother dies. Indeed, said Cummings. Poirot took his leave and stepped into the hallway. The manor remained quiet, eerily so. He could hear faint echoes of someone speaking behind a closed door upstairs. And somewhere below, the slow chime of a long case clocked out as he made his way back to the drawing-room. He passed the tilted painting once again. He stared at it for several seconds. Then, quietly, he reached up and shifted the frame 2 inches back to level. Nothing happened, except a faint rustled. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He stepped back. The wall just behind the painting had a nearly invisible hairline crackle on the paneling, a vertical seam that shouldn't have been there. Poirot murmured, eyes gleaming. You do not simply tilt because of wind and time. Mon petit tableau. You tilt to reveal. And with that, he turned on his heel. It was time to visit the Village Inn. And the man who came asking about the dead brother no one wanted to remember. Chapter 4. The man with a missing brief. Coselli Rosemorin stood at the edge of Aberdeen. A modest establishment with ivy-clad brick, crooked windows, and the faint aroma of peat smoke wafting from the hearth. Poirot arrived just after noon, greeted by the innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Prindle, a woman whose shoulders seemed always tense from worry and whose voice had the timbre of a wind-up clock. Precise hand. Nervous Mr. Fall. Yes, he's staying in room 3, 2nd floor, back corner, she said, wringing her hands on her apron. He left this morning before breakfast. Said he was going to walk along the coastal path. Seemed in a hurry. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. Did he say when he would return? No, sir. But he's paid through the week. Left his papers. Told me not to touch anything. Though I did tidy the bed. May I see the room? Mrs. Prindle hesitated. He said not to allow anyone. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Madam, a man is dead under suspicious circumstances, and your guest was among the last to speak with him. If Mr. Full has nothing to hide, he will not object, I assure you. I shall disturb nothing. She gave a reluctant nod and retrieved the brass key from behind the counter. The stairs creaked under Poirot's shoes as he ascended. The smell of old varnish and lavender soap thick in the air. Room 3 was neat, sparsely decorated an iron bed, a small desk with a lamp, a suitcase in the corner, a folded coat hung on a hook behind the door. The window overlooked the garden, and beyond that, the Fogler, Cliff's Edge. But what drew Poirot's attention was the conspicuously empty spot beside the desk in outline on the rug. Faint but unmistakable. A briefcase once stood here, he murmured, and now it is gone. The desk held a few pages of handwritten notes in a looping, elegant script. Henry's final years shrouded in Ruma Belgian sanitarium or coastal cottage in Devon. Conflict with Everard undisclosed, rumours of inheritance. Denied, Everard's own memoirs rumoured to have been burned by his own hand or Eugenia's. Questionable. Nurse Alicia present during a fainting incident in 1894. Too young. Confirmed date. Picture in drawing room only known portrait of Henry after 1890. Curiously rehung after decades in attic. Poirot scanned the papers slowly. These were not the notes of a casual researcher. Firle had been digging deep, and he had found things that someone clearly did not wish rediscovered. Poirot noticed a smaller page tucked behind the others. Covered in red pencil marks dotted red, tilted. Frame equals access, followed by a simple sketch of a wall panel, marked with a question. Secret door. He folded the page and slipped it into his breast pocket. A knock echoed from the hallway. Excuse me, sir. Mrs. Prindle called through the door. There's someone downstairs asking for you. A gentleman. Said he heard you were here. Poirot descended the stairs, already suspicious. The man waiting in the front parlour was tall, weary, with a narrow face and sharp cheekbones. He wore a tan overcoat and wire-rimmed spectacles. His hands fidgeted, despite his otherwise calm posture. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said with a polished accent. "Forgive me for the abrupt introduction. My name is Adrian Cole, the fiancé of Mademoiselle Clara." Poirot replied, offering a nod. "You come in search of me. I heard from Cummings that you had left the manor for the inn. I feared perhaps you'd misunderstood Clara. She's still shaken, of course, but she meant no disrespect." Poirot gestured to a nearby chair. "Set, monsieur. You have come a fair way to clarify something, I assume." Cole sat, smoothing his trousers. I simply want to make sure you're not wasting time. Everard was a hard man. Yes, but he was not the victim of foul play. Clara is convinced otherwise, and it's not good for our nerves. Poirot studied him. You are protective of her. Cole hesitated. "Yes, of course, and yet," Poirot said mildly. "I understand you supported her return to Carriswood to appease her father's demands, even when it interrupted her studies." Cole's jaw tightened. "We cannot live on music." "Monsieur Poirot, Clara needs stability." Poirot nodded. "And you, monsieur, do you need stability or inheritance?" Cole stood, the calm beginning to crack. "That's uncalled for. None, monsieur," Poirot said gently. "What is uncalled for is your attempt to visit me here, not to assist, but to dissuade. You are concerned I will find something." Cole said nothing. Poirot continued. "Did you speak with Mr. Full before he left this morning?" A flicker of something uncertainty passed across Cole's face. "No. I barely know the man. But you knew he was staying here. He mentioned it once." Poirot did not believe him, but said nothing more. He simply rose and walked to the window from the second floor. He could see the narrow dirt path that wound its way from the village down to the cliffs. "Do you walk the coast path, monsieur?" Cole looked wary. "Not often. I do recommend it," Poirot said quietly. "Especially today. One never knows what the sea might wash back." Cole frowned. "Is that a threat?" "Not at all. Only a suggestion." Poirot showed him out with a smile and returned upstairs. He needed time to think. Cole was hiding something. Of that he was certain. Foyle had likely uncovered too much. And now he and his briefcase were missing. There was a sharp knock at the door. This time it was a different voice. "Inspector Keene, Poirot. May I come in?" Poirot opened the door. Keene stepped inside and held up a telegram. "This came through just now, from the Belgian Municipal Archives. You asked for a verification of Henry Charteris's death." "Yes," Poirot said, heart quickening. Keene handed it over. "No record of death or burial. Henry Charteris nitrogen monoxide documented entry or departure from Belgium. Nitrogen monoxide institutional record found. Recommend checking UK coastal regions." Poirot stared at the paper. Henry Charteris had not died in Belgium. He had vanished, but not abroad. Which meant one of two things. Either Sir Everard had lied for decades, or Henry Charteris had never left England at all. And if the latter, someone at Cariswood Hall had a secret they'd buried alive. Chapter 5. The nurse who watched the door of fine mist had returned by the time Hercule Poirot walked back up the winding drive toward Cariswood Hall. The house loomed larger in the twilight, its windows still shuttered on the west side, as if the house itself mourned in silence. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes, and with every step he felt the weight of the telegram in his pocket. Henry Charteris had not died in Belgium. That single truth, quiet and indisputable, began to cast long shadows over everything else. The tilted frame, the vanished briefcase, the notes Foyle had left behind, and Clara's careful hesitation when speaking of her father's last days. Inside, he was met by Miss Lichevin, the family's private nurse, descending the staircase with a ledger under her arm. She was a woman of rigid posture and hollow cheeks, her expression fixed into the kind of polite severity that never invited personal questions. Poirot greeted her with a nod. "Mademoiselle, then, might I trouble you for a moment of your time?" She blinked, adjusting her wire-rimmed spectacles. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, though I'm afraid I'm due in the drawing-room shortly to assist Lady Eugenia with correspondence." "It will take but a moment," Poirot said, gently guiding her toward the reading alcove off the hall. She sat reluctantly, straight-backed, eyes cautious. "You were present in the house the evening Sir Everard died." "I was," she said, voice clipped. "I had just returned from a short walk. Sir Everard had retired to the drawing-room. I intended to prepare his evening tonic, but Lady Eugenia said he had declined it that night. You left him alone." Then, for no more than 5 minutes, she replied, stiffening. "He was quite healthy, despite his age. There was no cause for concern, and when you returned, I found him seated, eyes closed at first. I thought he was sleeping, but then I realized he wasn't breathing. Did you touch anything?" "No." I called for Lady Eugenia. She entered the room almost immediately. Then Cummings came, and Dr. Hargreaves was summoned. I left everything as I found it. Poirot watched her. "And the picture above the chair, did you notice it?" She blinked, then frowned. "The portrait of Mr. Henry. Yes, it startled me. Why so? Because I hadn't seen it in years. It used to hang in the east wing, in a room no one used anymore. I'd forgotten it even existed. Did you tilt it? No. Her answer was sharp. It was already crooked. I assumed it had been dislodged somehow. Porritt nodded, then gestured toward a ledger. You keep medical records. Yes, routine documentation, blood pressure, temperature, medication logs, that. Sir Everard insisted upon precision. May I? She hesitated but handed it over. Porritt flipped through the neat, dated entries. Everything was orderly. Nothing out of place until he reached the final page. There, dated the morning of Sir Everard's death. A single word had been underlined twice. Refuse. Refused what? Porritt asked. His tonic. She said, again. He said he didn't need it. It's a mild heart regulator, nothing dangerous. But he was advised to take it daily. He simply waved me off. Unusual. Yes, she said, folding her arms. Very. Porritt closed the ledger. And Mr. Foyle, did you encounter him? The nurse's jaw tightened, only in passing. He was asking odd questions, said. He was writing a biography of Henry Chartres, but I didn't care for his tone. Always hinting that something terrible had happened back then. Did you think something had happened? I wasn't here in those days, but I've heard whispers. Henry was considered delicate, not like his brother. He never seemed to recover from the falling out. You knew Sir Everard well, as much as anyone did. She paused. He didn't confide in people. He controlled them. Porritt looked up sharply. Controlled. She met his gaze. Yes. Everyone in this house followed his rhythms. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had a way of making silence unbearable. Porritt gave a slow nod. Merci. Mademoiselle, you have been most helpful. She rose. If you'll excuse me. I must prepare Clara's medication. She's been unsettled. Porritt watched her go. Then turned toward the central hallway, where the grandfather clock struck 6. The deep tolling filled the silence with something almost funereal. From the drawing-room came a flicker of lamplight and the faint clink of porcelain. Lady Eugenia's voice murmured softly within. Porritt was about to retire to his guest quarters when he was intercepted by Inspector Keene, his coat still damp with drizzle. I've been to the post office, Keene said. Another telegram arrived. This one's for you. Porritt took it and unfolded the slip. Foyle sighted this morning on coastal path. Heading north, nitrogen monoxide sign of return. Search initiated. Briefcase still missing. Keene frowned. You think he's hiding? Porritt tapped the telegram. None. I think someone wanted him to be missing. Whether he is still hiding or silenced, that remains to be seen. They walk slowly toward the study. Do you think the nurse is telling the truth? Keene asked. Porritt considered. She tells it precisely. That is not the same thing. She repeats facts, but avoids emotions. Yet I saw her expression shift when I mentioned Henry's name. Everyone flinches at that name in this house. Porritt paused by the study door. Because perhaps Henry Chartres never left. Perhaps he remained far closer than anyone dared admit. And now, the consequences of that secret have come due. Keene looked at him. What are you implying? Porritt looked back toward the drawing room, where the painting still hung askew once more. I am implying, mon ami, he said quietly, that someone tilted the past, and the present is sliding. Chapter 6. The second will following morning brought a change in the air, colder, sharper. The fog that had haunted the coast for days had receded, revealing the sharp edges of the cliffs and the brooding sea beneath. Hercule Poirot, however, was already dressed and waiting in the drawing-room of Cariswood Hall. eyes fixed once again on the painting that hovered like a spectre above Sir Everard's empty chair. Someone had tilted the frame again during the night. Not dramatically, barely 2 degrees, but Porritt noticed. Porritt always noticed. He waited exactly 7 minutes before the door creaked open and Dr. Lionel Hargreaves stepped in. A broad-shouldered man with a greying beard and sharp spectacles, the physician gave a stiff nod as he removed his gloves. "Monsieur Porritt, you asked to speak with me." "Indeed." "Doctor, please sit." "Tea?" "No, thank you," he replied curtly. "I have patients to see this afternoon." Porritt steepled his fingers. "I shall be brief. You signed Sir Everard's death certificate." "I did." "And you were satisfied by the cause of death?" Hargreaves met Porritt's gaze without flinching. There were no signs of trauma, no evidence of poisoning, and no symptoms suggesting foul play. Sudden cardiac arrest. Not uncommon in men of his age. Porritt smiled faintly. Even those in good health. "I said not uncommon, not inevitable." Porritt reached into his jacket and retrieved the nurse's ledger. "You've been monitoring his health?" "Yes, with Nurse Van. I reviewed her entries weekly." Porritt turned the book so the doctor could see. "Then you will note that Sir Everard's pulse, pressure, and tonic dosage were all regular. No skipped entries, no sudden changes until the final day." "He refused the tonic." Hargreaves nodded. "He did. I was told. Perhaps he forgot. Perhaps he felt fine. These things happen. Or perhaps he knew it would not matter." The physician stiffened. "That sounds dangerously speculative." Porritt tilted his head. "Then let us speak of facts. Doctor, was Sir Everard planning to change his will?" The pause that followed was brief, but it was enough. "I am not his solicitor," Hargreaves said slowly. "No," Porritt agreed. "But you are his confidant in matters of the body." "Yes, but I suspect also of the soul." The doctor sighed, removing his glasses to clean them with a handkerchief. "He asked me off the record about the risks involved in drafting a new will while under psychological pressure." "Psychological pressure?" "Yes, there was a letter, you see, from a man claiming to be Henry's son." Porritt sat up straighter. "Pardon?" Hargreaves nodded grimly. "It arrived 6 weeks ago. No return address, no proof, but it claimed that Henry Charteris had married secretly and fathered a child before his disappearance. The writer claimed to be the child and demanded acknowledgement, or reparation." Porritt's eyes gleamed. "And Sir Everard's response?" "He was shaken. He didn't tell Lady Eugenia, but I saw the letter myself. He kept it in the lower drawer of his writing desk, locked. He told me he needed time to decide what to do." "Was this before or after Mr. Foyle arrived?" "Before. Foyle arrived only a few days ago. Sir Everard was already brooding, paranoid, even." "Did you read the name on the letter?" "No." "Signature?" "Just initials." T.C. Porritt leaned back, fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "Fascinating." Dr. Hargreaves stood. "I shouldn't have said anything. It wasn't my place. You did what was necessary for justice." Porritt said calmly. "Was a new will drawn up?" "Drafted, yes. I don't know if he signed it." "Do you know who witnessed it?" The doctor shook his head. "He said he would have Cummings witness it, that it would be done quietly. But if such a will exists, no one has seen it. It hasn't been produced." Porritt's thoughts raced. "Merci, Doctor. You have helped more than you know." After Hargreaves departed, Porritt immediately summoned Cummings to the study. "Cummings," he said, once they were alone, "I must ask you plainly, did Sir Everard request your presence to witness a document in the days before his death?" The old butler did not reply immediately. But then he sighed, eyes heavy. He did, monsieur, 2 nights before he died. Poiret's heart quickened. Tell me everything. He called me into the library. He had laid out a document, said it was a codicil change to his will. He asked me to sign as a witness. No discussion, no detail, just that it was necessary. He said the solicitor would receive it the next morning. I asked if Lady Eugenia should be informed. He said absolutely not. Do you know where the document is now? No. It was gone the next day. I assumed it had been sent. Poiret frowned. And if it had not, then it is still somewhere in this house. As the butler turned to leave, Poiret caught his sleeve. Cummings, one final thing. You were loyal to Sir Everard for 3 decades. But if this new will named an heir that no one else expected, would that loyalty have limits? The old man looked Poiret directly in the eyes. My loyalty, monsieur, was to the man, not to his secrets. Poiret smiled softly. Wise words, left alone in the drawing-room once more. Poiret stood before the portrait of Henry Charteris. He reached up, tilted the frame gently, and once again, a faint sound. The barest click from the wall. A hidden compartment, a passage, perhaps a secret that the house had long tried to forget. He would return to it tonight. But for now, the truth was this. Sir Everard had tried to amend his legacy. He had tried too late to acknowledge a buried truth, and someone in this house had ensured that truth would never be known. Also they believed. Chapter 7. The secret behind the wall night settled thickly over Cariswood Hall, wrapping the manor in a hush broken only by the creak of floorboards and the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The corridors were quiet to quiet. Poiret thought as he walked once more toward the drawing-room, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the Persian rug beneath him. Everyone had retired for the night. Clara had pleaded a headache and gone to her room early. Lady Eugenia was said to be writing letters, though Poiret suspected she was merely avoiding conversation. Inspector Keene had returned to the village for the evening, promising to return with constables in the morning. But Poiret could not wait. He stood again before the portrait of Henry Charteris. The 2 brothers in the painting so alike in build, yet so different in expression. Sir Everard, rigid, arrogant, set-jawed. Henry, softer, amused, his hand on a walking cane as though ready to stroll away from the canvas. Poiret reached up and tilted the frame back once more just slightly, and there it was again. Click. This time, Poiret stepped closer to the paneling. Behind the chair, he ran his gloved fingers along the grain of the oak panel beneath the picture, pressing gently. The vertical seam he had noticed earlier yielded under pressure, with a soft creak. A narrow panel swung inward, revealing a small alcove behind the wall, not a passage, but a cavity perhaps 3 feet wide and 4 feet high. Inside, dust floated like ghosts in the beam of Poiret's pocket torch. At the back of the alcove, resting atop an old wooden crate, was a folded piece of paper, sealed in wax. Poiret's breath caught. He reached in and carefully extracted it. The wax bore the crest of the Charteris family, a lion rampant on a scroll. He unfolded the paper and scanned its contents quickly. To whom it may concern. This codicil hereby supersedes all previous wills dated prior to the 7th of October. I, Sir Everard Nathaniel Charteris, being of sound mind, do declare the following. I acknowledge the existence of one Theodore Charteris, son of my late brother Henry Charteris, born to Madeleine Lemoyne in the year 1893, and currently residing under pseudonym as Sebastian Fall. I name Theodore Charteris as primary heir to the estate of Cariswood Hall and all associated holdings, to be executed under the supervision of Dr. Lionel Hargreaves and Cummings. Clara Charteris shall Be guaranteed an annual sum of £5,000 for life, and Lady Eugenia Charteris shall retain right of residence. Signed, Everett N. Charteris. Poirot folded the codicil and slipped it inside his jacket. Heart quickened. For Theodore was the heir all along. He reached once more into the compartment and his fingers touched something cold. A key, small, iron and old. It bore no tag, but Poirot knew intuitively that it had purpose. He pocketed it and carefully closed the panel, realigning the painting just as it had been. When he turned round, a figure stood in the shadows near the doorway. Clara. Her nightgown shimmered faintly in the lamplight, her eyes wide with something between curiosity and dread. I heard a sound. She whispered. A panel. Opening. Poirot met her gaze calmly. I believe your father intended to tell you something, mademoiselle. But someone silenced him before he could. She stepped slowly into the room. Eyes drawn to the portrait, the wall. What's behind it? Poirot considered. Clara's hands trembled. Her breath was quick, and her gaze flicked from him to the chair and back again. It was a hiding place, he said gently. For a truth your family buried. Clara's voice cracked. I saw him. Mr. Foyle arguing with father. The night before. He shouted something. I was on the stairs. He said, I am not ashamed to bear his name. I didn't understand what he meant. You do now. Poirot said softly. Her hands covered her mouth. Then he really is Theodore Charteris, your cousin, the rightful heir. Poirot paused, which means someone in this house had reason to fear him. Her eyes filled. He's gone. Isn't he missing? Yes, but I believe he is alive. Poirot hesitated, though someone may be trying to ensure that is no longer true. Clara took a step toward the chair. Father always told me Henry had been unfit, that he ran off, that he betrayed the family. But what if it was the other way round? Poirot nodded. Your father was a man of order, but not always of justice. I believe he sought to make amends before the end. Clara's voice dropped. Mother knew, didn't she? Poirot studied her face. I believe she suspected. She knows more than she has admitted. Clara wiped her eyes. So what now? Now, Poirot said, producing the codicil from his coat and holding it delicately between two fingers. We bring the truth into the light. He turned to the door. But first, we must find Theodore Foyle, before someone ensures he is never found again. As he stepped into the hallway, Poirot glanced back at the tilted picture. In the shadows, it still leaned watchful, silent, but not for long tomorrow. The balance of the house would shift, and someone, somewhere within its walls, would begin to feel the first true grip of fear. Chapter 8. The watcher on the cliff's dawn broke with a strange stillness across Upper Dean. The sea was calm now, the tide low and creeping, leaving behind long trails of kelp and polished stones. Above the cliffs, the gulls circled silently, and Kerriswood Hall remained still, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the same coastal path where Sebastian, full Theodore Charteris, had last been seen. A light breeze tugged at his coat as he peered over the rise where earth met air and sky dropped away into crashing surf below. He was not alone. Inspector Keene stood a few feet behind him, squinting toward the rocks. We've had men combing the coast all morning. No body, no briefcase, nothing to suggest he fell. Poirot remained quiet for a moment longer before turning back. Non, mon ami. Because he did not fall. Keene raised an eyebrow. Then, where the devil is he? Poirot tapped his temple. You must consider the psychology, not merely the geography. If Theodore disappeared the same day, the codicil was hidden again. It suggests he discovered something threatening, Either he fled, or he was made to vanish. By who? Porritt gave a small shrug. Someone with a great deal to lose if he inherited Cariswood Hall. Keen frown. Lady Eugenia. She retains residence either way, Porritt said, eyes knowing. No, the motive lies with someone who cannot survive the shift in legacy. Someone who needs money, or status, or both. Keen folded his arms. Adrian Cole. Just so, they turned from the edge and began the walk back toward the village. Boots crunching over frost-laced gravel, the morning had a tightness too. It, like a string pulled taut as they approached the last bend before the lane. A shout echoed from below to constables waving from the inlet path where the cliffs sloped more gently down to the sea. Porritt and Keen hurried down the incline, breath puffing in the cold. They found him huddled behind a stand of windswept gorse, his coat torn. One eye bruised, shivering but alive, Sebastian Foyle. Keen knelt beside him. "Mr. Foyle, thank God. What happened?" Foyle looked up, dazed. I didn't fall. Someone pushed me. I tried to grab the edge, but slipped partway down the slope. It's a narrow ledge. Barely room to breathe. I waited. All night, Porritt. Crouched, examining his face. "Who pushed you?" Foyle opened his mouth to answer and then hesitated. He looked at Keen, then back at Porritt. "I didn't see. It was behind me, fast. I was reading a page from my father's journal when it happened." Porritt leaned in. "What page?" "I found it in Sir Everard's desk. He'd kept Henry's diary torn. Incomplete. It said Henry never left England. That he'd been held, somewhere, by Everard." Porritt's gaze sharpened. "Held," Foyle nodded slowly. It sounded like blackmail. He wrote about being afraid to leave, of being watched. Then the entry stopped. Keen swore under his breath. Porritt stood. "We must return to the house now." Cariswood Hall was not prepared for the storm that entered its doors within the hour. Sebastian Foyle limping, but upright, was seated. In the study, swaddled in blankets, Inspector Keen placed a constable at each exit. Porritt stood before the fireplace, the codicil resting in a document sleeve beside him. Lady Eugenia entered first, then Clara, pale and speechless. Adrian Cole followed last, attempting calm, but walking as if a noose had been fastened beneath his collar. "Let us dispense with ceremony," Porritt said sharply. Sir Everard Charteris was murdered. A gasp escaped Lady Eugenia's lips. Clara's hand flew to her chest. Keen stepped forward. "Porritt, are you certain? As certain as I am of the sea beyond these walls." He gestured to Foyle. "This man, Theodore Charteris, rightful heir to the Charteris estate, was attacked. He was meant to vanish just like his father, but unlike Henry, he survived." Adrian Cole's voice cracked. "You have no proof, Porritt interrupted, raising a finger. "I did not mention you, monsieur, but your conscience betrays you. You have been desperate for a solution since the moment you learned Clara would not be sole heir. You discouraged her return. You sought to discredit her suspicions, and when Theodore arrived, you found your replacement, one who could not be, bought or charmed. I didn't touch him," Cole snapped. "I never even saw him on the cliffs. But you saw the letter," Porritt said, voice suddenly cold. "The letter from Sir Everard acknowledging his nephew. And you saw the codicil or suspected it existed. You couldn't risk it. Even if that's true," Cole said, grasping for calm. "That doesn't prove murder." "No." Porritt stepped closer. "Then allow me to enlighten you. Sir Everard's death was to tidy. No tonic taken. Yet no panic. No symptoms. Yet no distress. He died with his hands clenched and slippers aligned. That is not how one dies naturally, it is how one dies sitting still, under pressure, from a fast-acting poison. Gasps echoed in the room. Keen blinked. But the report was based on assumption, not forensics. No autopsy was ordered, but the symptoms: rigid posture, clenched fingers, peaceful expression are consistent with digitalis in lethal dose, something Sir Everard had access to, but never used. Porritt turned to Miss Fenn, who had entered quietly with Dr. Hargreaves. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Fenn," he said, "was there ever an instance where you left the tonic unattended?" She frowned. "No. I kept it locked. Always." Porritt turned his gaze to the doctor. "And yet someone administered the fatal dose into something Sir Everard would take, without question." He looked again at the codicil. "I believe the moment he signed this document. He signed his death warrant." There was silence, thick and oppressive. Then Clara spoke. "I saw Adrian in the library that night, after Father went to bed. He said he was writing letters, but I heard him rifling through drawers." Porritt's eyes locked on Cole. "You found the codicil. You destroyed the journal page, and then, when you couldn't find a way to remove the door legally, you chose a more permanent method." Cole's face had gone pale. "You can't prove." Porritt raised his hand again. "No need. You pushed the door from the cliff, and you will be arrested for attempted murder. But the motive ties neatly to the death of Sir Everard. That will be enough for the courts." Adrian lunged just once, but Keene and his men were too fast. Within minutes, he was in cuffs. Lady Eugenia stared blankly into the fire. "He killed? For money?" "No, madam," Porritt said quietly. "He killed for control." Outside, the sea remained calm. But within Cariswood Hall, the tides had turned. And now the truth had risen with them. Chapter 9. The echo in the music room storm had passed. Cariswood Hall, shaken to its ancient foundations by the revelations of the morning, now stood wrapped in uneasy quiet. The police had left, taking Adrian Cole in custody. Lady Eugenia had retired to her room without a word. Dr. Hargreaves and Miss Fenn had been asked to stay a day longer, though both looked as though they wished to be anywhere else. Only Porritt remained utterly composed. He paced the music room, slowly, hands behind his back, eyes moving over every detail. It was late afternoon, and the golden light of the setting sun slanted through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes that danced gently above the grand piano. Clara Chardris sat at the instrument, her fingers resting silently on the keys. She had not played since Adrian's rest. Her eyes were dry now, her face unreadable. "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "about the night I returned from Vienna. Father stood at the top of the stairs and looked at me like I was a stranger. And yet, for a moment, I thought perhaps he meant to say something kind. But then he simply turned and walked away." Porritt didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch, as one would with a patient afraid of hearing their own thoughts aloud. Clara spoke again. "He never told me about Henry or Theodore. I wonder if he planned to, or if he thought signing that document was enough, as if ink and paper could atone for what he did. He was a proud man," Porritt replied softly, "but he was also a man who, in the final hours of his life, tried to do the right thing. That is more than some can say." She glanced down. "And yet he did without a word. No warning, no apology." Porritt paused beside her, watching her hands. "You are not angry?" "I was," she said. "I thought the house would be mine. I thought, for once, I could decide something. But now I realize I never truly wanted the legacy. I only wanted the truth." Porritt smiled faintly. "And you have it now." She nodded. "But what of Theodore?" Porritt said, glancing toward the hallway. He has recovered well. He is speaking with Inspector Keene about the estate and the legal transfer of ownership. He is reluctant. Claire looked up. Reluctant. He was never after. The house. Mademoiselle. Only his name. She absorbed this for a long moment, then turned back to the piano. My mother knew. Didn't she? Poirot exhaled slowly. I believe so, or rather, she chose to almost know. A delicate difference. She once told me that silence becomes a habit. But in this house, silence was a fortress. A single note rang out as Clara pressed a key G sharp. Then another, slightly off. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, what becomes of us now? Poirot turned to the window, hands folded. Now begins the unraveling. Inheritance is not simply about property, it is about understanding what one carries. Your cousin inherits the estate. Yes, but you, mademoiselle, you inherit the chance to be free. Clara gave a soft and certain laugh. Free of what? Of the weight of secrets. Of a family name that devoured its own. There was a knock. On the door, Cummings appeared in the threshold, dignified as ever. Mr. Foyle, pardon, Mr. Charteris, would like a word. If you please. Clara stood, smoothing her dress, and followed Poirot into the hallway. The study door was open. Sebastian. Foyle stood near the fireplace, holding a small leather-bound journal, the very one he had retrieved from Sir Everard's desk. He looked thinner than before, but steadier now, like a man who had finally stepped out from behind his own reflection. He extended the journal toward Clara. It's yours, she blinked. But I've read it already. It's not just about my father. There are entries about you, things Everard wrote, but never said. He was proud, in his own twisted way. Clara took the journal with trembling hands. I don't know what to say. Foyle offered a faint smile. We're both inheriting a ghost, Clara. Maybe reading his. Words will let us bury it properly. Poirot watched them, silent. It was a quiet thing. Reconciliation. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a gentle loosening of the chains that had bound two strangers under the same roof. Later that evening, as the household settled into a new and unfamiliar stillness, Poirot returned to the drawing-room one last time. The portrait still hung, above the chair straightened now, framed by firelight. Poirot approached it once more and studied Henry's painted eyes. They no longer seemed to follow him. Or perhaps it was simply that the house had exhaled. He reached into his coat and removed the iron key he had found behind the panel. After a moment's hesitation, he slipped it into the drawer of the old writing desk. The lock clicked open. Inside, a single envelope, blank. Poirot opened it. Inside was a photograph, aged, creased. Two boys, Everett and Henry, standing beside a tree, arms over each other's shoulders, smiling. On the back, in faded ink, we were not born enemies. Poirot folded the photo and returned it to the drawer. Then he straightened his cuffs, adjusted his tie, and turned to go. Outside, the moon rose over Carriswood Hall, casting its silver light across the manor and the path to the sea. A truth had been unearthed. A family broken had begun, quietly, to mend. And Hercule Poirot, ever precise, ever silent in his satisfaction, walked calmly into the night. Chapter 10, the letter that never left me the following morning. The rhythm of Carriswood Hall had changed, though the old bones of the house still creaked under the weight of memory. The staff moved with quieter steps, and the air inside felt less like a tomb. For the first time in decades, the drawing-room curtains had been pulled wide to let in the sea light. The portrait of Henry Charteris remained in place straight, undisturbed. Hercule Poirot sat in the breakfast-room with a cup of dark coffee, the aroma sharp and grounding. He did not eat, instead. He studied the journal Clara had passed to him the night before after reading only a few pages. "It's not for me to judge him," she had said, placing it in his hands, "but I think you will understand." The entries were terse and sentimental. Sir Everard Charteris had never mastered the art of warmth, not even in ink, but woven between. The observations on estate management and finances were fragments of conscience-awkward confessions, moments of regret cloaked in restraint. I see Henry's face in the mirror sometimes. Not the man, but the boy, the one who ran alongside me through the orchard. I wonder if I killed him when I sent him away, not with hands but with silence. Another entry caught Poirot's attention more sharply. He wrote from Brighton, said he was ill, that Madeleine had died. The child Theodore was being cared for by a woman named Carter. He asked for help. I told him to stop writing. I burned every letter but one. Poirot closed the journal slowly. That letter had never been sent to the solicitor, never shared with the family. But if one had survived, it might still exist. He rose and made his way to the library. The fireplace had not been lit, and the air was cool with the scent of old paper. Poirot moved to the desk, the same one where he'd found the codicil, and knelt to examine the lower drawer once more. Nothing but to the left. Behind a row of dusty ledgers on the bottom shelf, he found a gap in the wood, a hollow space. Poirot slipped his fingers in and drew out a thin, yellowed envelope sealed with wax long since cracked. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Everard. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, handwritten in blue ink, the edges brittle. "Dear Everard, I don't ask for forgiveness, only decency. Madeleine is dead. The boy is 7 now. His eyes are like mother's. I've named him Theodore. I don't ask you to take us in. I only ask that you make space for him in the world. If I die, he will have no one, not even a name. Give him that, at least. I beg you, H." Poirot read the words twice. Then the third time. No mention of illness, no self-pity, only a quiet plea for protection. Ignored. He slipped the letter into his pocket and turned to find Sebastian Theodore standing in the doorway. "You found it, didn't you?" Poirot nodded. "The letter from your father." Sebastian crossed the room and sat slowly in the leather chair once used by Everard. "I always wondered if he ever reached out, if he tried. But you know what's strange?" Poirot tilted his head. "I'm not angry anymore." "None?" Poirot asked. Softly. Sebastian looked at his hands. "No. The anger kept me alive for years, but now that I know the truth, I feel hollow, like a room finally emptied." Poirot stepped forward and placed the letter gently in his lap. "He tried, mon ami. He was frightened, yes, but he tried." Sebastian's fingers closed round the fragile paper. "I still don't know what to do with this house. You do not have to decide today." He nodded slowly. "Clara said she's leaving, going back to Vienna." Poirot gave a slight smile. "She is not running. She is choosing. There is a difference." Sebastian looked up. "And what about you? Are you leaving?" Poirot straightened his cuffs. But I have stayed longer than I should. I must return to London. There are other crimes, other puzzles, and my apartment is dreadfully disordered without me." Sebastian gave a small laugh. "Do you ever rest?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "I rest best when the truth is in its proper place." Later that day, Poirot made his way through the village square. A light rain had begun to fall, gentle, unhurried. The cobblestones glistened as he passed the Rosemary one final time. Mrs. Prindle waved him off with a wrapped package of shortbread. For the train, she insisted. As he boarded the noon express back to London, Poirot settled into his seat, removed his gloves, and opened a small notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "The affair at Cariswood Hall, murder by silence. Redemption by truth." He paused, then wrote one final line. "Even the tilted frame can be made straight again. With care." And as the train pulled away from the coast, Hercule Poirot closed the notebook, leaned back in his seat, and allowed himself, at last, the comfort of stillness. Chapter 11. The widow who didn't cry. The days that followed were quiet, at least on the surface. Cariswood Hall remained dignified in its silence, though something about it had softened. The walls no longer pressed so heavily on those within, and the weight of what had been hidden for so long seemed to lift, inch by inch, with each passing morning. But Hercule Poirot, even in his London apartment, did not forget the unfinished thread still trailing behind him. One such thread bore the name Lady Eugenia Charteris. She had not appeared during the final confrontation, had not spoken a word about the codicil, had not defended or denied Adrian Cole, and when Inspector Keene sent word confirming that the will would stand Theodore Charteris would inherit Cariswood Hall, her silence remained complete. No grief, no protest, no tears, and so, on the third morning after his return to London, Poirot penned a short letter, requesting a final meeting. He returned by evening train. When he arrived at Cariswood Hall, it was Clara who greeted him at the door, already packed for her departure to Vienna. She embraced him briefly, gratefully, and whispered, "She's in the rose parlour." She hasn't left it in 2 days. Poirot made his way there in silence. The rose parlour was one of the oldest rooms in the Manor, wood-panelled, with faded floral wallpaper and a view of the now dormant gardens. Lady Eugenia sat by the window, in a high-backed chair, her silhouette outlined against the waning light. A porcelain teacup sat and touched on the table beside her. She didn't look up as Poirot entered. "You have come to gloat, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice dry. "Non, Madam," Poirot said gently, taking a chair across from her, "only to understand." She turned slightly toward him, eyes sharp, lips thin. "You've already understood everything, haven't you? You've exposed the villain, revealed the heir, rewritten the history of this house. What more do you want?" Poirot didn't blink. "I want to know why you never cried." Lady Eugenia stiffened. "You have lost your husband, your future as mistress of this house, your daughter's fiancé, even if undeserving, and yet you have not mourned. Not once. Everard was not a man one mourns," she said coldly. "He was a man one survives." Poirot remained still. "I wept for him years ago," she continued, "when he sent Henry away, when he told Clara she could never study music unless she became useful, when he dismissed servants for speaking too freely. I mourned when he stopped speaking to me as a wife, and began referring to me as the woman who keeps the accounts. That was my grief. Monsieur, not this quiet ending you witnessed." Poirot nodded slowly. "You knew about Theodore." She looked at him, her eyes suddenly hollow. "I suspected. A letter arrived once, long ago. I intercepted it, from a woman in Sussex. She claimed to have cared for Henry's child. I burned it before Everard could read it. Why? Because I thought I was protecting us, the family, Clara, myself." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "But in truth, I was protecting the lie. And once you start protecting one, you must protect them all." Poirot studied her, and Adrian Cole. She looked away. "I never liked him, too polished, too eager to please. He latched onto Clara like a man drowning. I should have stopped it, but Everett approved. That was all that mattered. You never suspected him capable of murder. I suspected him capable of anything if it was dressed well enough." Poirot's gaze didn't leave her. You knew about the codicil, I guessed, when Everett summoned Dr. Hargreaves and locked himself in the study. He never told me outright, but I saw the change in him. He grew afraid, not of death, of being remembered the wrong way. Porritt rose slowly. You were not his accomplice, madam. But you were never quite his prisoner either. You lived in silence because it was easier than truth. She didn't argue Dot as he walked to the door. She called after him. What happens to me now? Monsieur, Porritt turned. You remain. If you choose, the will allows it. But you must decide whether this house remains a tomb or something else. Lady Eugenia's hands tightened round the arms of her chair. You think I am cruel. I think, Porritt said softly, that you are tired. And I think tiredness makes cowards of many who once dreamed of being brave. He bowed slightly and left the room. Dot in the grand hallway. Clara was waiting with her suitcase. She wore a simple travelling coat and gloves, her hair pulled back. Porritt walked beside her to the door. I never thanked you properly, she said, for staying. You are most welcome. Mademoiselle, and what of her? My mother, she has a second chance, Porritt said. They are rare, but she must take it herself. Clara looked toward the parlour. I'm not sure she will. Porritt smiled faintly. Then leave her with silence, for once. It may be hers to break. The carriage arrived. Clara boarded with a nod. Her eyes already set on the horizon. Porritt watched until it disappeared down the lane. He turned once more to Cariswood Hall, rising pale and still beneath the clouded sky. Then, without a word, he adjusted his hat and walked back into the wind. Dot, there was no applause, no curtain. Only the soft hush of justice settling into place, and the echo of a truth, long buried, now allowed at last to breathe. Chapter 12. The final deductional week had passed. Dot in London. The fog had returned, denser than ever, blanketing the streets with its familiar, concealing weight. But in Hercule Poirot's apartment at Whitehaven Mansions, the lights were bright, the clocks were precisely aligned, and everything on the breakfast table, knife, spoon, jam pot, sat at exact right angles. He had just folded the morning paper and set it aside when a knock came at the door. He opened it to find Inspector Bertram Keene, slightly damp from the rain, removing his hat with a faint grunt. You keep things much warmer than Cariswood, Porritt. But of course, Porritt said, guiding him inside, in London, one must manufacture order oneself. Please, sit. You have come not merely for the heat. I think. Keene dropped into the chair and accepted a cup of coffee. You are right. I've come for answers. Porritt raised a brow. To which questions? Mon ami. Keene leaned forward. There are still gaps in the case. You solved the murder, yes? Adrian Cole confessed to the attempted murder of Theodore Charteris, but the poisoning of Sir Everard, the codicil, even the letter you mentioned in your report, nothing ties it all neatly together. Porritt smiled faintly. Ah, but it does, if one knows where to look. Keene took a sip, then started at the beginning, not of the crime but of the motive. Porritt nodded slowly, folding his hands. Very well, the murder was not about hatred. It was about fear. Sir Everard, having ruled his estate with cold control for decades, discovered that the very thing he had tried to erase his brother's bloodline had returned. Not for revenge, but for recognition. He feared losing the estate. No, Porritt said. He feared losing control of the narrative. All his life, Everett had crafted a version of himself stern, incorruptible, unchallenged. The existence of Theodore disproved that image. Everett had not merely erased a brother. He had buried a son's future. Keene nodded. And the codicil was his way of... what? Seeking redemption. Porritt tilted his head. Not redemption legacy. The only thing more powerful than control for such men. He wanted to fix what he had broken, but quietly, without scandal, without confrontation. He drafted the codicil, hid it behind the portrait, and told no one but perhaps Hargreaves and Cummings. Then he waited, and that's when Adrian Cole acted. Just so, Porritt said. He saw the shift in Everard's behavior. Perhaps overheard conversations. He feared the codicil. He feared being cut out. He found the document and likely the journal as well and understood everything. Keen's jaw tightened. So he killed Everard, Porritt said, lifting a finger. That is where it becomes interesting. Keen sat straighter. You think he didn't? I think, Porritt said slowly. That Lady Eugenia poisoned her husband. Keen blinked. What? She showed no emotion, no signs. Of guilt, precisely. Because she had none left to give. Porritt rose and began pacing the room. Remember what she told me. She had mourned him years ago. She knew of the codicil, or at least suspected. She saw in it not just a loss of the estate, but the final humiliation, Everard admitting, in ink, that she had been complicit in a lie for 30 years. Keen shook his head. She had nothing to gain. She had everything to lose, Porritt said. And by acting first by slipping something into his food or water the night before she ensured his death would seem natural, she expected. No autopsy, no investigation. After all, he was an old man, prone to stress. Then why let Adrian take the fall? She did not let him, Porritt said. She didn't know he had pushed Theodore until it was too late. Her silence afterward wasn't guilt, it was strategy. The codicil had been found, the heir named. And Adrian's actions obscured hers entirely. She only had to remain still, as she had done for years. Keen rubbed his forehead. You can prove this. Porritt shook his head gently. None. Not in a court of law. There is no evidence. But the behavior. Mummy is a language louder than fingerprints. Keen muttered. I'll be damned. Porritt sat once more. And so we are left with a house inherited by a man who never asked for it, a daughter free of its ghosts, a widow who has mastered silence, and a murderer who walks free. You don't sound pleased. Porritt looked out the window. I am not here for pleasure, only truth, and I have found it. There was a pause. Keen reached for another sugar cube and dropped it into his cup. So what now? Porritt leaned back, letting his eyes close for a moment. Now, Caris Woodhall must learn to breathe again. Whether that means restoring it, selling it, or letting it decay is no longer my concern. Keen chuckled, and you, back to puzzles. In the papers and wayward cats in Kensington, Porritt opened one eye. Do not mock the dignity of a missing cat. Many a criminal has been unmasked by lesser clues. Keen stood, pulling on his coat. Well, Porritt, I'll say this: you're the only man I know who can take a tilted picture frame and turn it into a murder charge. Porritt smiled thinly. Because, mon ami, nothing tilts without intention. And with that, Inspector Keen took his leave. Porritt remained seated, hands folded, eyes on the misted window. The case was closed, but the questions it raised about pride, family, and what it means to bury the past would linger long after, just like the final echo of a name too long unspoken, Theodore Charles, and behind it, faint but enduring, the memory of a brother, never truly lost. Chapter 13. The footnote in the ledger: 3 weeks had passed since the final unravelling at Caris Woodhall. The newspapers had moved on. A small article in the Sussex Courier announced the transfer of the estate to Mr. Theodore Charles, nephew of the late Sir Everard, accompanied by a modest photograph of the manor cloaked in early frost. The name Adrian Cole was mentioned only once in the final paragraph, and without drama. London, in contrast, was in full winter. Hercule Poirot had returned to his routines, each one executed with the same precision he applied to crime-solving. His morning walk was timed to the second, his post carefully sorted, and his cases when they came were smaller now. Missing jewelry, forged signatures, a mysterious letter sent to the wrong flat, minor disturbances in a world that otherwise kept its secrets better than Caris would ever had. And yet, on the first Friday of December, a new envelope arrived. It bore no return address. Poirot opened it at once. Inside, a letter written in an unfamiliar but elegant hand, and a folded page that looked distinctly like a torn piece from a ledger. The letter read, "Monsieur Poirot, there are things I cannot say in person, but you are owed an explanation. Your deduction about my involvement in Sir Everard's death was not wrong, but neither was it wholly right. I did not intend to kill him, not at first. But intentions are slippery things when pride is threatened. The poison, yes, it was mine. An extract used for a now abandoned tonic. I kept it locked away. Everard had become suspicious and settled. I only meant to quiet him. I did not anticipate the effect of mixing it with wine. He died before I could decide whether I truly wanted him dead. That moment lives with me. It always will. I kept one thing from you. In his final days, Everard discovered not just Henry's child, but another deception, a financial one. Enclosed is a page from the estate ledger hidden deep in the accounts. A trail of payments from a secondary fund he created long ago, hidden from the main record. Find the name at the bottom. Then you will understand why he rewrote the will. Do with this what you must. I will remain, as ever, where I have always been, between the truth and the silence. E.C. Poirot's fingers lingered over the signature. E.C. Eugenia Childress. Not brave enough to confess aloud, but brave enough to send this. He turned to the folded sheet. It was stained, frayed at the edge, torn from a larger volume. The ink was faded but legible. It listed a series of monthly payments, small but regular, over the span of 2 decades, and at the bottom, beneath the final entry, recipient, E. Lemoine, in trust for T. Carter. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Not Madeleine Lemoine, the mother of Theodore, but A. Lemoine, Madeleine's sister. He looked closer. The dates began in 1894, shortly after Henry Charteris had disappeared from public life, and ended in 1915, the year Sir Everard formally took over the entirety of the Charteris estate. The entries were annotated with the same cautious hand Sir Everard used in his own journals, a hidden arrangement, funds diverted. Not out of guilt, but necessity. Theodore had not been forgotten after all. He had been maintained, discreetly, almost clinically, but not without awareness. Poirot stood from his chair and paced to the window. Mon Dieu, he whispered. He funded the boy's upbringing, yet denied him his name. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't cruelty. It was control. So Everard had watched from afar, not enough to intervene, not enough to love, but enough to ensure the boy lived. The ledger wasn't a confession, it was a contract. Poirot's mind reeled back through the timeline. Theodore, raised by strangers, educated well enough to become a writer, to carry himself like a man of refinement, and all the while, someone had been paying his way silently, secretly. Clara had never known, nor had Lady Eugenia. Most likely not until she intercepted the ledgers, and when she did, what must she have thought? Not just betrayal, but competition, a boy raised in the shadows, quiet. Invisible, might rise one day and take everything she had kept together through silence. Poirot turned to his desk and retrieved a small index card. He scribbled a few notes, then folded the ledger page back into the envelope. He did not call the police. He did not write to the solicitor. Instead, he wrote a letter to Theodore Charteris. Monsieur, you may already know the estate ledger was incomplete. What you may not know is that you were not entirely abandoned. I enclose a page that should explain more than any word of comfort could. Make of it what you will. But know this, you were not just a secret. You were an insurance, a legacy long planned, if never openly accepted. And now, the house is yours, the ghosts, too, but also the chance to become something new. Yours. Each he sealed the envelope and summoned the courier. As the door closed behind him, Poirot returned to the fire, folded his arms, and watched the flames. Every crime had a cause, every lie a wound beneath it. But sometimes the most human crimes were the ones committed not out of greed, or hatred, or revenge, but out of fear. And as the firelight flickered, Poirot thought again of Cariswood Hall not as a place of murder, but of unfinished stories. Stories now. At last, nearing their end. Chapter 14. The man at the garden gate there was crisp, with the unmistakable smell of coal smoke drifting through the narrow lanes of Aberdeen. It was mid-December, and Cariswood Hall stood solemn against a sky of pale pewter, its windows frosted at the corners and its chimneys whispering thin curls of smoke into the wind. A week had passed since Theodore Charteris received Poirot's letter. He had read it in silence, seated at his father's desk, the same one behind which Sir Everard had drafted generations of decisions, many of them cruel, all of them precise. The enclosed ledger page had told him something no living voice ever had, that his existence, though denied, had never been entirely forgotten, and now, with the manor formerly his, Theodore had begun the long and uncertain process of inhabiting a legacy he had spent his entire life not knowing he was owed. That morning, a gardener had arrived, not a stranger, but a local man whose father had once tended the rose pots during Henry Charteris's boyhood. The man offered to prune the winter vines back, to prepare the soil for spring. Theodore accepted. It was late afternoon when a figure was seen at the edge of the east garden, the gate nearest the wild W. Woods where the hedge had once grown so thick it formed a wall of its own. The man stood still, coat buttoned high, cap low over his eyes. He was older, perhaps 70, with a gait slowed by time, but a bearing that was unmistakably military. He stood watching the manor, unmoving until a housemaid noticed and informed Mr. Charteris. Theodore stepped outside without coat or gloves. He did not recognize the man, but something in the posture, in the expectant silence of his presence, made him pause. "May I help you?" he asked. The man nodded. "You are the new master." Theodore hesitated. "That depends," the man gave a faint smile. "I suppose it does. Forgive me. My name is Thomas Carter." The name struck like a stone dropped in a still pond. "The woman who raised me," Theodore said slowly, "was named Margaret Carter. My wife," the man said, "deceased 2 years now. She never spoke of our arrangement, not even to me in full, but I knew of the boy, of Henry's son. We were paid regularly and asked only to provide shelter. My wife took the boy to the coast after Madeleine passed. I stayed behind for work. I was never permitted contact." Theodore's throat tightened. "You knew about me all this time, only in outline," Carter said. "Not in name, not in voice, just the payments, the letters written in a careful hand, unsigned, and the photo, one photograph, sent to my wife." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it across the garden fence. Theodore opened it. A boy, no older than 8, seated on a stone wall with a book in hand, hair combed neatly. Eyes sharp. He had no memory of the photo being taken. Poirot's letter had hinted at things, but this man, this stranger at the garden gate, confirmed them. His childhood had been purchased like a trust fund, not from kindness, but out of strategy. You didn't come before, Theodore said. No, Carter replied. We were told not to. I obeyed. But my wife, she saw something in you, and when she died. I kept the photo. I've watched the news. Saw your name in the paper. So why come now? Carter met his gaze. Because you deserve to know that someone, somewhere, cared enough to see it through, even if they did not do it right. Theodore folded the photo. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Thank you. Carter nodded and turned to go. But Theodore spoke again. Wait. Carter paused. I don't know if I believe in family, Theodore said, but I believe in responsibility. Would you? Come for tea. I'm not offering answers, only perhaps the beginning of something else. The older man hesitated. Then he smiled. Yes, I'd like that inside. The parlor had been warmed. The fire was lit. The old rugs cleaned. The scent of fresh bread drifting faintly from the kitchen. Cummings, the ever-faithful butler, had returned to assist with the transition. He served tea now with quiet deference, though his eyes watched everything. As Theodore poured, Carter spoke again. There's something else you should know. He said, a week before your father died, he sent a parcel to my wife. It was never opened. I brought it with me. He reached into his coat and produced a small, wrapped bundle, aged brown paper tied with twine. Theodora unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a worn leather notebook, bound tightly. A note slipped inside the cover. For Theodore, I never had the courage to say it aloud. But this, I hope, says enough. -H.C. Theodore opened to the first page. I once believed silence was strength, that to hide a thing was to master it. But I have lived long enough to know that silence breeds rot, and that the truth, however painful, is the only inheritance that matters. He closed the book gently. Across from him, Carter sat back, watching him quietly. The two men, strangers by blood, connected by the same lie, sat in companionable silence as the fire crackled low, and somewhere, far from Carriswood Hall, Hercule Poirot sat by his window in London, stirring his evening tisane. He did not know of the visitor at the garden gate. He did not need to. He had already sensed, in his careful way, that one more knot had quietly come undone. The past was not undone, but it had, at last, been acknowledged. And that, for Poirot, was enough. Chapter 15. The photograph on the mantel-snow had come to Upper D, and he arrived without ceremony, drifting in overnight and laying a soft, clean hush across the landscape. By morning, Carriswood Hall looked almost innocent again, its stone walls capped in white, the gardens glistening, the driveway smoothed over as if no footsteps had ever crossed it. Inside the manor, Theodore Charteris stood before the fireplace, in the drawing-room, staring at the spot where the portrait of Henry and Everard had once hung. He had taken it down the day before, not in anger, but in a quiet act of revision. In its place, a different photograph now rested on the mantel. It was small, black and white, taken many years ago. It showed a boy, Theodore himself, sitting, cross-legged, with a dog beside him, his hair tousled by the wind. Not a formal portrait, not one ever meant for display, but it was real. And that, at last, was enough. He had spent the past week organizing the estate records with Cummings. There were debts to clear, small holdings to verify, and a dozen lingering legal matters tied to the transition of ownership. Poirot's ledger page, now locked in the new master drawer of the study, had proven invaluable, establishing a paper trail that even the most skeptical solicitor could not dispute. But the house itself remained stubborn. Every corner still echoed with someone else's memory. The rose parlor, the library, the upstairs hallway where his father's boots had once sounded. It wasn't ghosts. Exactly, it was the residue of control. And yet, for the first time, Theodore felt he might stay. He moved to the window. Snowflakes swirled softly against the glass, blurring the hedges, the old fountain, the barrow near the gate. From this window one could see most of the grounds, and as he stood there, something moved at the edge of the path. He squinted. A woman, small, bundled tightly in a green wool coat and grey scarf. Her head was lower, her pace hesitant. He knew instantly who it was. Moments later, Clara Childress stepped inside the hall, brushing snow from her shoulders. She looked thinner, paler, but calmer. Her eyes found his immediately. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I took the early train." Theodore offered a faint smile. "You should have ridden." "I didn't think I'd come," she replied. "Not until I woke up and needed to." He guided her into the drawing room. Cummings appeared silently with tea, then disappeared just as quietly. Clara took the cup but didn't drink. Her gaze fell on the photograph. "You replaced it." He nodded. "I wanted something in here that wasn't curated." She stared at the photo for a long time. "Do you remember that dog?" "Only vaguely." He said, "I think his name was Baxter." She smiled slightly. "It suits him." There was a pause. The fire cracked softly. Then she looked up. "I saw Mother before I left." "How is she?" "Still in the house in Bath. Quiet, distant, but different." She asked if I was angry with her. I told her no. "I'm not sure that's true, but it was the closest thing I could say that wouldn't reopen something." Theodore nodded. "She said she wanted to write to you," Clara added, "but she wasn't sure how to begin." "I'm not sure I'd read it," Theodore replied. Then, more gently, "But I wouldn't tear it up." They sat in silence, sipping tea. The room was warmer now, and the light from the fire reflected softly off the polished wood. Clara stood and moved slowly to the bookshelves. Her fingers drifted across the spines. "I used to come in here when I was little, only when no one was watching. I'd open the big books and pretend I was important enough to understand them." Theodore smiled. "You were—" She turned, surprised. "You were the only real thing in this house." He continued. "Even before I knew who I was, you asked questions. You didn't just accept what was handed down." She looked away, touched. "I still don't know what to do with it all," he said after a moment. "The house, the land, the past. It's like inheriting someone else's puzzle." "Maybe," she said softly, "you don't have to solve it. Maybe you just rewrite it." He blinked. "That sounds like something Poirot would say." She laughed. "Or something he'd let you figure out just before he left." There was another silence, but this one felt peaceful. Eventually, Clara stood to leave. "I won't stay long. Just wanted to see it again. How it looks now. Stay as long as you like." Theodore said, "You're always welcome." She looked at him then, not as a stranger, not even as a cousin, but as someone who had shared the same broken inheritance and survived it. As she stepped toward the door, she paused. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said, "about that night. The night Father died." Theodore froze. "I saw Adrian in the hallway," she continued, a voice low. "He was holding something, a piece of paper. I didn't know what it was then, but later I realized it was probably the codicil. He must have taken it from father's drawer and hidden it behind the portrait again, hoping no one would find it. Theodore's breath caught. "I didn't say anything at the time," she said. "I was too scared, too unsure. But you should know he didn't act alone." He stared at her. "You mean?" She shook her head. "I don't know who else, but someone else knew what was at stake. Someone helped him distract the staff. Maybe Mother. Maybe Miss then. I'll never know for sure." He nodded slowly. "But you," she said, stepping closer, "you were never meant to disappear." She left before he could reply. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, covering her tracks as she crossed the garden and stepped into the carriage that would take her back to the station. Inside, Theodore turned back to the mantel. He reached for the photograph, adjusted its angle slightly just so, and stood still as the fire warmed the room. It was not justice that lingered in Cariswood Hall now. It was something far more difficult to earn: belonging. Chapter 16. The whisper in the ledger room. Snow kept falling. By the next morning, Cariswood Hall was buried beneath a blanket of white so thick it muffled even the wind. Inside, the fireplaces roared steadily, and the silence was broken only by the low ticking of clocks and the occasional shuffle of Cummings as he moved discreetly through the house. Theodore sat alone in the estate office, the old ledger room, tucked behind the library. He had barely used it until now, but something about the quiet regularity of the space suited the strange in-between state he was living in. Ownership hadn't made him comfortable. It had made him more curious. He ran his hands along the spines of the ledgers lining the shelf behind the desk. Dozens of them: account books, estate tax volumes, tenancy records dating back to the early 1800s. Sir Everard had maintained them all with military precision. Nothing in Cariswood had ever been undocumented, but it was what wasn't written that Theodore was learning to look for. He pulled one of the older volumes from the shelf, a ledger marked 1901 to 1906, bound in cracked leather and speckled with ink from long-dried quills. He flipped through page after page of expenses, footnotes, inventories, and caretaker wages, all meticulously logged. But near the end of the book, something caught his eye: a single entry, abrupt, wedged between routine notations, as though hurriedly inserted. May 2nd, 1904. Transfer £500 each. Charters, cottage repairs, Lywood Estate. He frowned. The Lywood Estate. That was a remote stretch of forested land on the very edge of the Cariswood holdings. It had been overgrown. For decades he remembered it from childhood walks. No one had lived there. Not even the groundskeepers. Theodore reached for the next ledger and scanned the subsequent years. April 1905. Additional materials. West Shed reinforcement. Lywood, July 1906. Unnamed tenant supplies. Discretion requested. Then nothing. The entry stopped. The forest was never mentioned again. No tenant names. No income listed. No rent recorded. Just those cryptic expenses, logged and buried. He leaned back slowly. Could this be where Henry had lived? Had Everett not just funded his brother's exile but contained it? Theodore stood quickly, heart beating faster. He pulled on his coat and boots, grabbed a torch, and rang the bell for Cummings. Within minutes, the old butler appeared, gloved and furred for the weather. "I need your help," Theodore said. "The Lywood Estate. There's a structure there, possibly a cottage or outbuilding. I want to see it now." Cummings blinked, hesitated, then gave a solemn nod. "I know the way." "Sir." The walk through the snow was slow, but not difficult. Cummings led the way with the familiarity of a man who had long ago memorized every curve of the land. The path wound west through dense pines until the trees grew wilder, the canopy heavier, They passed beneath a rusted iron gate, its hinges seized, the sign above faded beyond legibility. Then, just past a ridge, they saw it, a cottage small, sunken, half covered by a mildew. The stonework was soot-streaked, the roof partially collapsed on one side. A shattered lantern hung above the door. The windows had been boarded over with warp planks long ago, though some had split from weather and time. Was this ever in use? Theodore asked quietly. Cummings's voice was low. Once. But no one's spoken of it since I was a young man. Who lived here? Cummings paused. Your uncle. For a time. Theodore turned to him. You know. I suspected. The housekeepers whispered. They brought food, left it at the edge of the path. No one saw him. Only once. I did. A figure. At the window. Watching. They stepped inside. The air was musty, but dry. The floor sagged in places, but the structure still stood. Inside were the remnants of habitation shelves, a rusted stove, a desk shoved beneath the front window. Dust covered everything in a thick coat, but beneath it there were signs, a chair, a walking stick, a cracked porcelain basin. And in the corner, a small trunk with brass clasps. Theodore knelt before it. It was locked. Stand back, he said, and using a broken iron, he forced it open. Inside were only three things: a wool scarf, yellowed with age, a journal, bound in faded blue leather, and a pocket watch. The watch was engraved to Henry, from "He let no hour divide us." Theodore's breath caught. He opened the journal. The first page was dated 1899. I am alive, but only just. The man I knew as my brother now sees me as a trespasser. He calls this arrangement mercy. I know it. As a prison, page after page detailed a life lived in shadows. Visits from Everdre, cold, exacting, promises made and broken. Talk of Theodore, always in hushed language. One line, near the middle, struck deepest. He says my son will never bear our name. That blood is not enough. That reputation must be protected from lineage. Theodore closed the journal. Outside, snow fell heavier now. The sky darkened. He stood slowly, holding the book and the watch, the only surviving pieces of a man erased. He was here, he said aloud. He lived and died here. Cummings nodded, and was buried in the east glade. No marker, just earth. Theodore turned to look out the window toward that part of the forest. We'll place one, he said. A stone, a name. He looked down at the pocket watch again. Its hands had stopped at 4:17. Who knew how long ago? He slipped it into his coat as they left the cottage. Theodore looked back only once. This time, he did not feel watched. He felt remembered. Chapter 17. The name in stone. Theodore stood beneath the bare, frost-covered trees of the east glade. As the first light of morning broke across the woods, the snow had thinned overnight, revealing the soft and even ground that Cummings had pointed to the day before. A shallow rise of earth between gnarled sycamores. There was no marker, no cross, no stone, only the memory of a burial done in silence. He had returned at first light, alone. In his hands, he held a plaque simple, unadorned, carved into rough-cut slate. He had commissioned it overnight from a local mason who worked fast and asked no questions. The inscription was short, barely a sentence. But it was everything Henry had once been denied. Henry Chartres, 1866 to 1912, beloved, buried. Remembered. No titles, no embellishments, just a name and the right to be named. Theodore knelt and began to dig. using a small spade to clear the frozen earth and flatten the base where the plaque would stand. His breath formed small clouds in the winter air, and each movement came slowly, deliberately like a ritual dot as the stone settled into place. He sat back on his heels. He did not speak. Words felt unnecessary. For the first time, this forgotten space was no longer hidden. It was acknowledged, and that, perhaps, was the only kind of justice still possible. Later that afternoon, Theodore returned to the drawing room. The fire was burning in the grate, and for the first time, the room felt warm not just in temperature but in tone. The photograph on the mantel remained the small boy and the dog, but now a new object sat beside it. The POC. Kept watch, cleaned and restored. The inscription on its back had been polished until it gleamed. "Let no hour divide us." He thought often about those words. Had Everett meant them when he gave the watch to Henry? Or had they been a cruel irony, a relic of closeness that was later weaponized? It no longer mattered. The legacy belonged to someone else now. Not to Everett, not to the lie. To him. He walked over to the writing desk and pulled out the journal Henry had left behind in the cottage. It still smelled faintly of earth and old paper. He had only read the first dozen entries. It was not something to be devoured in one sitting. The grief and grace in the handwriting required space between lines, between pages. Today, he turned to a passage near the end, dated just weeks before the final entry. "I have dreams of the boy. I don't know what he looks like now. He must be 20. I wonder if he reads, if he asks questions, if he has Madeleine's sharpness or my stillness. Sometimes I wonder if he's forgotten me, or worse, never been told I existed at all. But I still whisper his name when I wake. Theodore. Theodore. Let the wind carry it, if nothing else will." Theodore's hand lingered on the page. He closed the book gently and set it down. There was a knock. On the door, Cummings stepped in, holding a letter. "From London. Sir, arrived by courier." Theodore took it. Heavy stock paper, embossed return address. Whitehaven Mansions. He smiled. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten in perfect loops. "My dear Monsieur Charteris, I have thought often of you since our last conversation. Closure is a fine thing, but more elusive than it sounds. We do not always know when we have found it, only when we have stopped chasing it. I trust the stone you placed has found its rightful place in the earth. Let that act, small though it may seem, anchor your memory to something immovable. And as for names, be proud of yours, not for what it inherits, but for what it survives. Your servant in truth and quiet admiration." Hercule Poirot. Theodore read it twice. Then he walked back to the mantel, slid the letter behind the photograph, and let the warmth of the fire ease the chill still clinging to his coat. That night, he sat alone at the piano in the music room. Clara had told him once, before leaving, that their father had never allowed music after dark. It disturbed him, she'd said. It stirred memories, but Theodore had no such rule. He played slowly, awkwardly, only a few notes at a time. He was no musician, but the melody he stumbled through, half remembered from his childhood, came easier than expected. A lullaby, perhaps, something Margaret Carter might have hummed, or something from nowhere in particular, just the echo of a life not fully forgotten. The house didn't resist the sound. It listened. And for the first time, Cariswood Hall sounded like a home. Not a fortress, not a secret, a place where even the tilted things had, finally, been set straight. Chapter 18. The tilt rested. London, early January. The fog had returned, thick and velvet grey, curling against the windows of Whitehaven Mansions. Inside, Hercule Poirot sat at his desk in a pool of amber lamplight, putting the final touches on a letter. His pen moved with meticulous care, as though each word were a chess piece placed with strategic intent. He paused only once when reaching the salutation and tapped the nib thoughtfully against his lower lip. Then, in his elegant, compact hand, he wrote, "To the future heir of silence." He nodded, satisfied. The letter would remain sealed, kept in his private archive. It was not for Theodore Charteris to read today, or perhaps ever. But Poirot had long since learned that some truths, when finally unearthed, were best stored away for a time when the soul could bear their full weight. He stood and walked to the fireplace, where a small fire burned low. On the mantel sat a folded newspaper, the Sussex Courier, dated 2 days prior. Its front-page story was modest but meaningful. Cariswood Hall to open historical wing honoring Henry Charteris family heir establishes memorial site. After a discovery of private journal and burial site, Poirot smiled faintly. Not a monument to wealth or bloodline, a memorial to remembrance, quiet, overdue, and deeply human. The final chapter of the Charteris legacy was no longer being written by those who had sought to conceal it, but by the one man who had once been denied the right to exist within it. Poirot poured a small glass of cream de cassis and took a single, contemplative sip. His mind, however, was not quite done. There had been one last riddle, one detail that had nagged at him quietly through the snow and smoke and secrets. The tilted picture frame, not simply a symbol of guilt, nor merely a trigger for discovery, but a message, a deliberate angle, 20 degrees precisely, a slant unnatural to accidental shifts, but too subtle to draw suspicion. And yet, when aligned against the edge of the fireplace, it created a clean line of sight, not to the chair wherever it had died, but to the exact drawer where he had hidden the codicil. Poirot had realized it the moment he returned to London and studied his sketches. The tilt had not been after the death. It had been before, and only one person could have placed it there, in silence, in defiance. Not Adrian Cole, not Eugenia. Not even Theodore. Henry. The thought was almost too poetic to bear. From exile, from seclusion, Henry had tilted the picture as a final rebellion, a whisper that his legacy had not died, that someone still remembered, and Sir Everard, haunted by his brother's gaze, by the slant of a picture he could never explain, had finally relented, not out of grace but weariness, perhaps guilt, perhaps something approaching shame. And in the end, it had worked. The frame tilted, Poirot followed, the truth emerged. He set his glass down, opened a fresh envelope, and penned his final words on the case, not for the courts, nor for any client, merely for himself. Case name: the affair at Cariswood Hall, crime, poisoning, forgery, obstruction, victim, Sir Everard Charteris and others. Long before, culprits, multiple, each playing a role in silence. Final verdict: justice achieved not through rest, but through remembrance. Truth, in the end, does not rive with thunder. It rives on quiet feet, through tilted frames and whispered names. He folded the paper, slipped it into the file, and placed it on the shelf between the case of the amber cigarette and the clock that struck the teen. Then, as he always did at the close of a case, Poirot extinguished the fire with precision, adjusted the drape of his curtain, and straightened every object on his desk. Everything in its place, even the past, even the silence, even the tilt.